Welcome, friends, to this 16th Medieval History Journal lecture. Medieval History Journal is an international journal published by SAGE. It's nearly 3 decades now that it has been published by SAGE. Medieval History Journal, in the term medieval and history, both are, we take these terms as expansive terms. Both medieval and history are inclusive of lots of things which are not defined as medieval. Medieval extends to early medieval, early modern for sure, but it also goes backward. And history includes everything: literature, art, sciences, whatever. And and medieval history means medieval history of the whole world, anywhere in the world. So we have been publishing highly researched academic articles for the last 30 years in this journal, and we have kind of created a kind of niche for ourselves in the academic world for this kind of studies of medieval and early modern world. We also have been, for the last 15 years, we also have been holding an annual lecture uh, called Medieval History Journal Lecture, where we invite the global front ranking scholars, historians to give a lecture on a theme or a topic of his or her choice, and of course, a region of his or her expertise. So we have had lectures on various kinds of themes: Islamic world, China, India, Europe, Latin America, and so on. Today, we are lucky to have very honored to have Professor Samuel Lieu speaking to us on China. The lectures are always published in the subsequent issue of MHJ, that's to say, which is due in May of 2026, or perhaps even earlier, if there is space. The lecture will be chaired by my editorial colleague, Professor Sally Church, who is herself a distinguished China expert. She is located at Cambridge, along with a speaker. Well, over to you, Sally. I'm sure we'll have some questions at the end. So you are going to manage this. Over to you, Sally.
Okay, thank you very much, Harbans. Hello, everyone. My name is Sally Church, and I have the honor of acting as chair today for the 16th Medieval History Journal lecture. This lecture will take us on a fascinating journey through time and across space, showing how a scroll unearthed in Dunhuang, the Morgal caves, which was left behind by Europeans in 1907 and 1908, was recognized as linguistically unique by the Chinese scholars, and how its subsequent study, translation, and publication between 1911 and 1913 by the French scholars Paul Pelliot and his mentor Edouard Chaban opened up a whole new field of knowledge about the interactions among different languages and across distant regions of the world. It turns out that Manichaeism, which was named after Mani, a 3rd century Iranian of the Parthian Empire, spread across many empires and regimes for centuries, crossing continents, interacting with other religions and societies, finding expression in languages from a variety of linguistic families, and spanning the entire medieval period from the 3rd to the 15th centuries. In fact, following the diffusion of Manichaeism into new lands, as this lecture does, opens one more means of understanding the Silk Roads and the cultures along them. Taking us on this exciting journey today is Professor Samuel N.C. Lieu, who was born in Hong Kong and had his initial education there in St. Paul's College. He then studied for his BA at Emmanuel College, Cambridge, in ancient and medieval history, and completed his DPhil at Oxford in ancient history. This was where he began his study of today's subject, through his doctoral study of Manichaeism in the later Roman Empire and medieval China. After completing his doctorate, he was a junior research fellow at Oxford, and from 1976 he taught at Warwick University, serving as lecturer, senior lecturer, reader, and professor of ancient history between 1976 and 1996. In 1996, he was appointed as chair of ancient history at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia, succeeding Professor Edwin Judge in that position. He was awarded the title of Inaugural Distinguished Professor by Macquarie in 2010. After retiring from his position there in 2016, he became Emeritus Professor at Macquarie the following year. Professor Lieu has received many honors for his research. He became a Fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society in 1981, the Royal Historical Society in 1983, the Society of Antiquaries in 1989, and the Australian Academy of the Humanities in 1999. He was awarded a centenary medal by the Governor-General of Australia for his contribution to both classical and Asian studies in 2003, and he was awarded a DORA Discovery Outstanding Research Award, a research professorship, by the Australian Research Council in 2012, which enabled him to concentrate on research on religious texts from Central Asia for 3 years, 2013 to 2015. He became a Fellow of the Royal Society of New South Wales in 2015, an Honorary Fellow of the Hong Kong Academy of the Humanities in 2018, a Fellow of the British Academy in 2021, and a member of the European Academy in 2022. Since 1996, he's been co-director of the UNESCO-sponsored Corpus Fontium Manichaeorum project, a project also sponsored by the British Academy and the Australian Academy of the Humanities. He's currently coordinator of the China and Ancient Mediterranean World project of the International Union of Academies. Over the years, he's published monographs and peer-reviewed articles on the history of Manichaeism in both Europe and China. In addition, he's also published on the Church of the East in South China during the Mongol occupation, on the reign of Emperor Julian the Apostate, on the defense of the Roman Near East, and on the Byzantine, Greek, and medieval Latin legends on the Emperor Constantine, as well as on the classical and Byzantine Thracian Chersonese, more popularly known as the Gallipoli Peninsula. He also published the lead article on the names for China and the Chinese on the Silk Road in the May 2024 special issue of the Medieval History Journal on China, India, and Iran, scientific exchange and cultural contact through the first millennium CE. So with this rather long introduction, which testifies to the breadth of his knowledge and his extensive academic accomplishments, I'd like to hand over the floor to Professor Samuel N.C. Lieu, who will deliver the 16th Medieval History Journal lecture on Manichaeism in China, a century of new discoveries.
Thank you, Sally. Can you all see and hear me? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Good. Thank you.
We can see you and hear you.
Yes. Well, I would like to, first of all, thank Sally for such a wholesome introduction. And I would also like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Sage for inviting me to deliver the 16th Medieval History Journal annual lecture. I have chosen a topic which is well known to medievalists, especially those who work on the medieval West, thanks especially to the book you may not be able to see, by Sir Stephen Runciman, The Medieval Manichae. which partly inspired my research as a postgraduate student. Now, I would now quite like to go to my PowerPoint. Right, can you see my PowerPoint now?
Yes.
Good.
Yes, yeah.
Now, I will now go to, yes. Okay. In the few years of peace before Europe was engulfed by the Great War, European scholars were astounded by the publication between 1911 and 1913 in a leading French journal of Oriental Studies, a series of 3 long articles by 2 eminent French sinologists, Edouard Chavin and his student Paul Pelliot, entitled Un traité Manichaeien retrouvé en Chine. Sorry for my French pronunciation, but in English it means a Manichaean treatise recovered, or i.e. discovered, in China. The first of these contains a fully annotated translation of a Chinese Manichaean text found in the Mogao caves of Dunhuang, which had escaped being taken by Orlstein to India, and then later to London in 1907, and by Paul Pelliot himself in 1908 to Paris. The manuscript, in the form of a scroll over 6 meters long with 345 vertical lines of Chinese, was recognized by Chinese scholars who brought the text back to Beijing as a religious work of Persian origin, because it contained a large number of religious terms derived from Iranian languages and not from Sanskrit or Pali. For those who can read Chinese, you could see this very unusual use of the word dian, which means lightning or electricity in modern Chinese, because it's very important for pronunciation in Iranian. The scroll had lost its first line, which would have carried its original title. And Professor Lieu, the then leading scholar of Dunhuang studies, Dunhuang texts in China, gave it the provisional title of Bo Si Jiao Chan Jing, which means an incomplete sutra of a Persian religion. Liu Zhenyu published the text in the form of a hand copy of the content, but without any accompanying photographs of the manuscript. It was on this basis of this hand copy that Chavin and Pelliot published the first of their 3-part article that would inaugurate the study of Chinese Manichaeism. Pelliot must have regretted that he had not brought this unique manuscript back with him to France on his visit to Dunhuang in 1908. He might well have eyeballed the Manichaean text, but without a title and with a Buddhist-style preface, Pelliot might well have thought it was just another Buddhist text. The identification by him and his mentor Edouard Chavin of the text as Manichaean did not come as a surprise to Pelliot, as he had almost a decade earlier, published a version of a famous apocryphal Buddhist text, the Hua Hu Jing, Sutra on the Conversion of Barbarians, which was found in Dunhuang, and in which a divine figure called Mani or Mo Mani, which is of course the name Mani's name and title in Syriac, the founder of Manichaeism, was depicted as a future manifestation of Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism, who was alleged not to have died but wandered into the Western regions and became a future manifestation of the Buddha. And became the Buddha. Pelliot even collected together some evidence of Manichaean activities in China proper from a wide range of pre-modern Chinese sources. However, this seminal publication by Pelliot was not much noted by scholars until his 3-part joint work with Chavin revolutionized the study of the subject appeared a decade later. Paleo was able to identify among the Chinese texts, which he did bring back to Paris, a short text of some 28 lines as the concluding part of a summary of Manichaean doctrine. This text has come to be known to scholars as the Fragment Paleo, after its discoverer. This he and Chavin published in the second part of their three-part article. The third installment of their now famous work comprises a significantly expanded collection of historical sources on the diffusion and survival of Manichaeism in China, which Paleo had published a decade earlier. The existence of Manichaeism in China, once doubted by none other than Chavin himself, in an article in 1897, was no longer in question. Scholars in China took the publication of their French colleagues very seriously. Professor Tang and Yuan, the doyen of foreign religions and foreigners in pre-modern China, and the then vice-rector of the Catholic University of Beijing, published a long article on the diffusion of Manichaeism in China based on the testimonia collected by Paleo, and added to it an important passage from a gazetteer, the Min Shu, the Book of Min, which is South China, compiled by He Qiaoyuan, who lived between 1558 and 1632, about a Manichaean shrine in the province of Fujian, which has survived well into the 15th century. The same author also republished the long Manichaean treatise from Dunhuang, now suitably renamed Manichaeism, the incomplete sutra of the Manichaean religion, and corrected some of the errors made by the scribe of the hand-copied text reproduced by Chavin and Paleo. The onset of the Great War, however, gave little opportunity for the work of the two French scholars to gain greater publicity among Anglophone scholars. While the three-part article of Chavin and Paleo was translated almost in its entirety into Chinese, only two feeble attempts by Western scholars based in China were made to make the works of Chavin, Paleo, and Tang and Yuan more accessible to scholars who did not read French or Chinese. Moreover, the identification of a genuine Christian document in Chinese containing a Chinese version of the Gloria in Excelsis Deo among the Dunhuang texts brought back by Paleo to Paris created great excitement among scholars worldwide, as it vindicated the authenticity of the bilingual Chinese and Syriac texts on the famous Xi'an monument, till then the sole document of medieval Christianity found on Chinese soil. The discovery of a long and complex Manichaean text in Chinese was completely sidelined, and the Judeo-Christian and Gnostic elements in it were and still are little realized. I'd just like to say a little bit about Mani and Manichaeism for those listeners who are not familiar with either the founder or the teaching of his religion. Mani, the founder of Manichaeism, was born around about 216 CE, and according to a semi-autobiography in Greek, found in a miniaturized codex from Egypt, was from Roman Egypt, was brought up in a Jewish Christian Baptist sect in southern Mesopotamia, then under Parthian rule. He was a speaker of East Aramaic, and he rebelled against his religious superiors in his 24th year, i.e. when he was 23 years old, over ritual washing as a form of religious purification, and styled himself Apostle of Jesus Christ, preaching a new doctrine drawing on Syriac Christianity, Second Temple Judaism, and Zoroastrianism. Central to his teaching was a primordial struggle between the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness. Here you have the father of greatness, the principal deity of the kingdom of light, depicted in this Manichaean miniature, he is a fourfold god. He's a god with fourfold virtues. They are divinity, purity, great power, and wisdom. And interestingly, this miniature, these four virtues were depicted by four Indian deities. According to Professor Klimkite, if you start from right to left, you have Shiva with the third eye, and then you have Brahma, Vishnu with a boar's head, Shiva with you have the third eye, Brahma, Vishnu with a boar's head, and Svaraha, and Ganesha, of course, the elephant god. The opposed to the kingdom of light is the kingdom of darkness, dominated by the prince of darkness, which, according to an Arabic source, has the head of a lion, his body like that of a dragon, his wing is like the wing of a bird, and his tail like the tail of a great fish, and his 4 feet like the feet of a beast of burden, i.e., very much like a Chinese dragon. And it's very interesting that this wall painting was found in a cave, which was said to be Buddhist, but which might well have had Manichaean occupiers before it became a Buddhist sanctuary. The central to his teaching, as I said, was a primordial struggle between the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness. Humankind was the creation of this conflict and was of sinful nature unless redeemed by divine knowledge, represented by a divinity known as the light mind, or the nous. The sect was divided into 2 classes of believers. The elect were priests who studied and copied scriptures and led an ascetic life, including strict abstinence and regular fasting. Their needs were attended to by hearers, who were lay brothers and sisters who could marry and lead a normal life. The young Mani traveled in Mesopotamia and neighboring regions in India before being granted an audience with the Shahanshah Shapur I, who was the king of kings of the new Sasanian dynasty. We have in the Cabinet de Madaille in Paris a rock-cut crystal of his image, surrounded by the inscription Mani, the Apostle of Jesus Christ, in a script which we now call the Manichaean script, which he might have worn as some sort of identification badge at the court of Shapur. His teaching enjoyed great missionary success in Iraq and Iran and in the eastern provinces of the Roman Empire. However, he fell out with one of the Shapur's successors and was accused of being a bad social influence and a failed physician. He was cruelly put to death circa 262 CE, and although he was not actually crucified, his followers commemorated his death in the annual feast of the Bema, which they regarded as a form of crucifixion. At the feast, an image of Mani, or a living member of the elect, was placed on a platform, which you can see the headless figure, on a platform. Or a platform of 5 steps, and hymns were sung and special food, most mainly fruit, consumed, and special biscuits or bread with the sun and moon symbol on them. Mani's followers were severely persecuted both in the Sasanian, Persian, and the Romano-Byzantine empires, as well as in the Abbasid Caliphate. Fortunately, the sect was well established beyond the Oxus River by the time of Mani's death, and its main scriptures have been translated from the original East Aramaic into Parthian and Middle Persian. Manichaeism became a Silk Road religion par excellence and found many followers among Sogdian merchants who translated the scriptures into their own language and later into Chinese and Turkish. As the Tang government opened China proper to foreign cultures via trade and foreign migration, the entry of Manichaeism into China was a matter of time, and Manichaean communities might have been worshipping in cave temples in the western regions of China as early as the end of the 7th century CE, especially in places like Sangim. From the historical sources compiled by Paul Paleo, we learn that the religion reached China in the early 8th century, and this has been confirmed by finds of Manichaean paintings overlaid by Buddhist ones in cave temples at Sangim. However, the new sect was only allowed by the Tang government to be propagated among members of the foreign communities. The status of religion, however, changed completely when the Khagan of the Uyghur Turks, who were the main mercenaries of a weak Tang government, was converted to the religion in 762. The capital of the Uyghur kingdom was then at Karabalgasun on the Orkhon south of Lake Baikal, and the conversion was celebrated on the famous fragmentary trilingual inscription, which is in Turkish, Sogdian, and Chinese, found at the ruins of the capital city of Karabalgasun. In 840, the Uyghurs fell victim to another Turkic tribe called the Kyrgyz in a fratricidal war, and they were resettled by the Tang government in the region around Kotso. This is Gaotang in Chinese, in what is now Xinjiang, or in the time of what I'm talking about, the early 20th century, East Turkestan. A major breakthrough in the study of the eastward diffusion of Manichaeism came in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, coinciding with the discovery and decipherment of the Chinese Manichaean text from Dunhuang. Between 1902 and 1914, German archaeologists conducted a series of excavations of oasis sites in East Turkestan, especially in and around the important medieval city of Kocho, or Karakoya or Turfan, then called Idikut Shari. Grunwedel, one of the leaders of the first expedition, brought back to Germany vast numbers of texts and text fragments, some containing very fine, vast numbers of texts and text fragments in scripts and languages, which is then new to Western scholars. Some of these are extremely beautifully illuminated. Fortunately, and of course, I said that there's both in these texts, they have scripts and languages then still new to scholars in the West. But as you can see, fortunately, some of these are beautifully executed, and once you're able to decipher the text, you will have no difficulty in reading them. And in Berlin, they had in Dr. F.W.K. Müller, a sinologist who was well qualified also in Arabic, Persian, Turkish, and Syriac. Müller took a particular interest in texts written in a variant form of the Estrangela Syriac script, which has some resemblance to the cursive Palmyrene Aramaic text, which he was able to decipher because of his excellent training in Semitic studies. He began his attempt at decipherment in March 1903 with an exceptionally well-preserved fragment on white leather, but he made little progress as the language of it, which we know to be Sogdian, was then unknown. He turned to the other texts in the same script, and less than a year later, in March 1904, he was able to present to the Prussian Academy a full table of transcription specimen texts, and even sample translations. He was also able to tentatively claim that the primary language behind the text written in this special script was an early medieval form of Iranian, and that the texts contained scriptures and hymns belonging to the Manichaean sect. The new texts deciphered by Müller were a sensation because systematic persecution by Christians and Muslims had left us few original Manichaean texts. The 5 months after his initial lecture, Müller placed before the same academy a substantial selection of genuine Manichaean texts with interlinear translations, as you can see here on the screen, in German. The modern study of Manichaeism had truly begun. The texts came from the period between the 9th and the 10th centuries, when Manichaeism was the state religion of the Uyghur kingdom, with its capital at Kotzal, and documents discovered later would reveal Manichaean monasteries flourished under the patronage of Uyghur Khagans and were hives of artistic as well as commercial activities, including the ownership of vineyards. The ban on the consumption of wine by the Manichaean elect notwithstanding. Members of the Second German Expedition discovered the site of a Manichaean monastery library that was apparently undamaged until the beginning of the 20th century, when irrigation channels were dug, causing a rise in the water table and the books to rot. Many of the texts discovered, as you could see, are beautifully illustrated. And they were, say, produced by well-trained scribes working for rich patrons. The team also discovered the remnants of a Christian monastery. Here you have what might have been a Palm Sunday scene at Bulayik. And from Bulayik was also discovered a number of Christian texts in the Syriac script, which of course, the standard Syriac script, the Estrangera script, which Müller could read with ease. And he recognized immediately that these texts use the same language that he could not decipher on that very beautiful parchment text back in 1903. And he recognized also that these Christian texts, some of them must be parts of the New Testament from some of the names he could recognize. And of course, he has now got his Rosetta Stone. And with the help of the Syriac New Testament, he was able to transcribe this language which had failed him so far, namely Sogdian. The successful decipherment of these text fragments showed beyond doubt that both Manichaeism and Christianity were active on the Silk Road and had well-established bases among the Sogdian mercantile communities on the western frontier of China proper. And from Dunhuang also they discovered Manichaean texts. You have a confessional in Uyghur, Turkic, written in a Manichaean script, which is currently on display in the British Library. A very long scroll brought back by Stein. And you also, very interestingly, an omen book, but written not in a Manichaean script, although it's written by Manichaean, copied by Manichaean scribes, because it says so in the colophon, but in the runic script, a script which had already not been in use for almost 2 centuries. It's like publishing a modern German book in Gothic. In 1926, a Manichaean hymnal in Chinese was identified by Dr. Lionel Giles, then keeper of the Oriental printed books and manuscripts in the British Museum, among the many manuscripts brought to London from Dunhuang by Sir Oral Stein. The work, consisting of more than 400 lines in Chinese characters, copied onto a long scroll, bears the title of Shabujan, which literally means the lower part of a hymn, of a hymnal. But some people believe that it's a hymnal for the Manichaean hearers, the lower class, or it could be an antiphonal collection for people who sing bass or who had a specific reason for using these, because there is no theological reason why these hymns should have been used just by the hearers. A colophon states that the hymns in the scroll were translated from Sanskrit, by which Parthian, the northwestern dialect of Middle Iranian, was meant. And the hymns contain refrains in Parthian, and Aramaic in Parthian and Aramaic, phonetically transcribed into Chinese characters, no doubt to assist Chinese followers of the faith who could not read or understand Parthian to chant in that language. Another manuscript brought back by Stein turned out to be none other than the main part of the Manichaean Catechism, or Compendium of Doctrine and Practice, of which the fragment Paleo was its final part. The united document is known by the title it still possesses, the Compendium of the Doctrines of the Styles and the Teaching of Mani, the Buddha of Light. A number of Japanese scholars soon became involved in the transcription and editing of the three Manichaean texts in Chinese so far discovered, and their efforts are enshrined in volume 54 of the Japanese edition of the Chinese Buddhist canon, the Taishu Xinshu Daizu Kiao, which made the text, of course, instantly available to a wide range of sinological scholars. All three Chinese Manichaean texts from Dunhuang were critically re-edited before the end of the last century by Professor Lin Wushu of Zhongshan University, whose edition is accompanied by black and white photographs of all three Dunhuang manuscripts. A fourth Manichaean text was identified from the collection of Dunhuang manuscripts housed in Beijing in the early part of this century. The reason why it was not identified earlier is because it uses entirely Buddhist terminology and even has a Buddhist title, Sutra on Buddha Nature, Fa Fu Xing Jing. Although doctrinally it is entirely Manichaean and is paralleled in Manichaean texts in Coptic and Old Turkish. The long Manichaean text treatise in Chinese, first published in 1911 by Chavang and Paleo, and now housed in the Metropolitan Library of Beijing, appears to have been a Chinese adaptation of a work in Middle Iranian. This was proved beyond doubt by Professor Werner Sundermann, who in 1992 published a large collection of fragments in Parthian and Sogdian of a work known as the Sermon of the Light Mind, nous in Greek. An international team under the direction of the present lecturer and Dr. Gunnar Mikkelsen assembled all known fragments of this text in Central Asian languages, which involve close collaboration with two members of Academia Europaea, Professor Nicholas Sims-Williams, also a fellow of the British Academy, and Dr. Enrico Morano. Their work was made much easier by other international projects which had digitized the relevant fragments, making them available for consultation anywhere in the world. And as you can see also, it allows us to put the text and the Chinese version against a photograph of the original fragment. Here you have Professor Morano, Dr. Morano and Professor Nicholas Sims-Williams at work in Sydney, a long way away from where the text fragments are housed, which of course, which is Berlin. And as you can see, by being able to download the text directly online, makes it possible to do this kind of intricate comparative work anywhere in the world now. And their joint effort was then checked by myself against the Chinese version of the treatise. Basically, what the two Iranologists did, Professor Morano being an expert on Parthian, Professor Sims Williams, of course, many of you know, is a great expert on Sogdian. They translated the fragments word by word, and I translated the Chinese version character by character, repeating perhaps the work of one single Manichaean scribe who knew all the languages. But in this way, we were able to come up with a modern edition of this work to replace that of Chauvin and Paleo. As you can see in this new edition, you have the Chinese on the right-hand side, the English translation of the Chinese, and all the fragments in Parthian, Sogdian, and Uyghur on the facing pages. So you can compare the Chinese immediately with the Parthian and Turkish equivalents. Now, a bit more history. Along with other foreign religions, including Buddhism, Manichaeism suffered persecution in the late Tang period, especially in the so-called Huiqiang persecutions of 845 CE. However, the earlier patronage of the religion by the Uyghur Turks, who were invaluable as mercenaries to the Tang government, meant that a number of Manichaean monasteries had been established in a few key cities in China that ensured the survival of the religion into the post-Tang era. Just have a drink of water. One of these temple monasteries was the Chongshou Gong at the modern port city of Ningbo. And it was from there that in 1264, an amicable correspondence occurred between the Zhang Shisheng, the erstwhile abbot of the monastery, which is now mainly a Taoist center of worship, and Huang Zhen, a very well-known Confucian scholar. The latter had not heard from his friend for many years and was pleasantly surprised to receive a letter from him, including an account of the innovations Wang was accomplishing for the monastery, which was also his home. And I have here a short quotation from his letter. He asked his friend to make a record of the innovations, but he would also like to recall specially the purpose for which this temple, which was also now his home, which he was innovating to be his home, was the purpose for which it was originally built. Now, he was rather regretful about this. He says, this tale is not one which can be used as an example of the past for the enlightenment of the future. When my teacher Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism, went to the region of the West, he became Mani Buddha. His rules of self-discipline are particularly strict. The followers of the sect are only allowed to eat 1 meal a day. On fast days, they are not allowed to be out of doors. His rules are certainly stricter than what would nowadays pass for the rules of purity and tranquility. My dwelling place was called a Taoist temple from the moment it was built because it was used for the worship of Mani, who was originally Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism. And then he goes on, which I won't read all of, but he says that a greater degree of physical comfort also means more chance for the heart to grow lax. The strictness of Mani's rule is such that although I have not practiced it for a long time, it is still alive in my mind. Therefore, I shall be grateful if you could make a record of my story as a warning to yourself and to posterity. And Wang Zhen, being a good Confucianist, wrote back and said, "What's this? What are you talking about? Your religion has is groundless. It's not part of the 3 main religions of China." And then he got a reply saying, "What makes you think that my views are groundless?" The Sutra on the Conversion of Barbarians, remember, there's the page of that was discovered by paleo with Mani as a manifestation of Lao Tzu in it. And he quoted almost exactly what it says in that paleo fragment. And then he then goes on to say that the Lotus Sutra also mentioned Moni, but probably a play on Mani's name because the word Moni is also Chintamani, jewel, in Buddhism. And he also said, very importantly, the great poet Bai Lu Tian wrote a poem about Mani, about Manichaeism, in which he says the 5 Buddhas continue the light. The 5 Buddhas are an important pentad in Manichaean cosmogony. He said that Bai must have based this on a thorough knowledge of Manichaeism. And so therefore, my religion is not groundless. The port city of Ningbo, where these letters were written, has another important and unexpected link with Manichaeism. In May 2008, Professor Yoshida Yutaka of Kyoto University in Japan, a noted scholar of Manichaean texts in Middle Iranian, especially in Sogdian, was contacted about some Buddhist paintings in private collections in Japan, which might have been of Jingzhao, i.e. Christian Church of the East provenance. Professor Yoshida had no difficulty in identifying one of them, which depicts a cosmogonic scene as Manichaean, as its features, as you can see in the slide, a celestial wheel or lens with 12 human faces. This is known to us from none other than the neatly executed Turfan fragment of cosmogonic text in Sogdian, which had once defied decipherment by Dr. Müller in Berlin. I won't read it out, but as you can see, the important words are the one, so they set up one magic 12-faced lens. 8 Buddhist-style paintings in Japanese collections were soon identified as Manichaean, including one depicting the birth of Mani, as recounted in the compendium from Dunhuang, and another, this one, depicting the 6 waves of perdition. You have the upper part of the painting, and you have the 6 waves, the bottom, and you also have the one I mentioned earlier, the painting on the birth scene of Mani, which is summarized also in the compendium from Dunhuang. The number of Manichaean paintings from China after a worldwide search has now exceeded a dozen. Research by Professor Yoshida has shown that some of the paintings originated from Ningbo. The same temple which was renovated and expanded by Wang Zhen's friend in the Song period might have been responsible for producing Buddhist-style Manichaean paintings that were sold to visiting Buddhist monks from Japan and taken back to the land of the rising sun, where they are still kept. Not all encounters between Manichaeans and Confucian scholars, Confucianists, were so amicable. The latter, who filled the ranks of the civil administration, would have encountered the sect as a secret religious society in the southern provinces with potential for social dissent and even revolution. The Manichaean sect, known officially as Monijiao, the sect of the teaching of Mani, or Mingjiao, was given Mingjiao, the light sect, was given the opprobrious title of Shichai Shimo, which means vegetable eaters and demon worshippers. The term Mo, demon, being a homophone of Mo in Moni, Mani. One official commented their self-help structure was based on the teaching of the sage kings of old, but these teachings have been perverted for subversive purposes. Time won't allow me to read that in full, but it will, of course, be in the published version of my article, of the lecture. Now, the fate of the sect and death of the Christians, i.e. the Church of the East or Jingjiao, took a favorable turn under the Mongols, who completed their conquest of Song China about 1277. Themselves foreigners, the early Mongol rulers showed great toleration of foreign religions, especially of Christianity, and Manichaeans were brought under the same protective fold. This was achieved with the help of allied tribes like Uyghurs and Karaites. Many members of these tribes had been converts to Christianity in their native towns and villages along the Silk Road, and their religious allegiance is attested to by a number of tombstones found in the port city of Quanzhou in the province of Fujian, one of the most important seaports from in South China. These contain elaborate and unique examples of Christian art which show heavy Buddhist influence, which I'll show you in a minute. But I'd just like to show you one tombstone, which is that of Mar Solomon, the bishop. Because, interestingly, he was, besides being a bishop, he was the administrator, that's his official title, of Christians and of Manichaeans in the combined circuit of Jiangnan, which means south of the river. And as you can see, his name, Episcopa, is transcribed into Chinese, Episcopos, the bishop. His name is Mar Solomon. And interestingly, we have in the Travels of Marco Polo, in the Latin version of what we call the Z version, an account that Marco Polo, on his way to Quanzhou, where he caught a ship which took him and his family back to Italy, he encountered a secretive religious group, which he identified as Christians. And he asked a delegation of them to be sent to the court of Kublai Khan in order that they could gain religious freedom, because so that they wouldn't be persecuted anymore. But at the court, the Buddhists claim that this secretive religious sect was not Christian, they were Buddhists. And the Taoists said exactly the same. And so did the Christians, of course, each wanting to claim them as their own so that they could have a greater base for tax rebates and a greater numerical base for tax rebates from the government. But Kublai Khan, bored with the theological discussion, turned to this members of the delegation and said, "Who do you want to belong to?" They said, "We want to join the Christian sect because we have always been Christians." However, many scholars believe that they were actually Manichaeans, and that's Marco Polo had accidentally stumbled across a secretive Manichaean sect. And when the bishop took them in, he discovered that they were not Christians, and so he included their sect in his title. So he was bishop of both Christians and Manichaeans, a very unique example of ecumenism in the medieval world. Now, as I have said before, the Gazetteer of Min mentioned the fact that there was a Manichaean shrine on Wabiao Hill near the port city of Quanzhou. And scholars were able to, sorry, I seem to have lost the slide. Oh, here it is, yes. Scholars were able to track it down in the 1950s. But not long after they had published the initial findings, the Cultural Revolution broke out. And they also showed that it was a genuine Manichaean shrine because it had an indubitably Manichaean inscription at the front, which called to recite or memorize purity, light, great power, wisdom, which you may remember are the four aspects of the father of light, represented by the 4 Hindu deities in the illuminated manuscript. And it mentions Mani, the Buddha of light. And it was interesting, it was inscribed in 1445, right in the Ming period. And not long after the monastery had been, the shrine had been discovered by local Chinese scholars, Cultural Revolution broke out. And as someone who started his doctoral dissertation on Manichaeism, both in the Roman East and in medieval China, I was extremely worried that this might have suffered some kind of vandalism or even destruction during the uncertain years of the Cultural Revolution. So I was very, very pleased that one of my teachers at Oxford, Professor Piet van der Loon, one day turned up with a tourist guide to this area and showed me, look, there is a color photo of the shrine that you have been talking about in your thesis. And it hasn't been destroyed, obviously. And this is actually an extremely valuable photograph, because since then, the building had been much extended because its popularity among visitors and pilgrims. So it's now one of the rarest color photographs we have of what the building looked like before it was modernized and extended. And in fact, the UNESCO Silk Road, Maritime Silk Road, even managed to organize a visit to the site, and this is now recorded on an inscription in the courtyard of the shrine. This is, Sally could read, the Maritime Silk Road on it. This is now what the shrine looks like, as you can see, massively expanded because of the number of tourists and pilgrims, because it is still a very important religious site. And Fujian, as many of you know, is very close to Taiwan geographically, and many Taiwanese came from Fujian, and many returned to their home villages, and sometimes to even visit the ancestral shrines like this one. And this is a view of the shrine taken from the hillside, from the back. Inside it is a statue of Mani as the Buddha of light. And we can tell it's Manichaean because we have other portraits of Mani from the manuscripts found in Turfan, in this case, a Turkic Manichaean potty book, which is a kind of a book written on leaves. And sadly, the inscription had been destroyed, and they had to replace it now with a modern copy, which didn't, unfortunately, give the very important date of 1445. But in the excavations near the site, they further proved that the site was Manichaean because they found enamel bowls with the word Ming Jiao Hui written on it, which means that the Society of the Religion of Light, i.e. the Manichaeans. But what is interesting, though, is that once the Australian team under my direct leadership started to do a proper survey of the shrine, we found that it was quite a modern-looking building. It uses things like concrete, for instance, in some of the extensions. And this inscription, in fact, tells the full story. What happened was that in the early part of the 20th century, 2 local Buddhist monks were convinced that the surviving statue of Mani, the Buddha of light, is a very special manifestation, not of Mani, but of Sakyamuni, the Buddha. And they founded a new cult based on Mani or Muni, the Buddha of light, which had nothing to do with Manichaeism, although there are probably some aspects of some Manichaean texts that survived, and some phrases were used not so much in their liturgy, but in their charms and in their prediction sticks, the sotices. When we visited them in the early part of the end of the last century, there was still a nun who could remember the two founding monks of this particular local cult. And yes, you can see, it's the statue of Mani which had perpetuated a new cult, not Mani nor his teaching. And you can find little statues or copies of the Mani as a statue of light in local shrines. Here you have Professor Nicholas Sims Williams looking at one of them in a virtually a domestic shrine, and also a much more public one with a very fine charcoal drawing of Mani as the Buddha of light. And altogether, there are several thousand worshippers of this neo-Mani cult. I wouldn't call it Manichaean because it is of Mani the Buddha, not of Manichaeism. Just to go back to what I've said before, we need to remind ourselves that Christianity also thrived in this region because so many Karaites and Uyghurs lived there who were Christians in Central Asia, and they filled a number of roles for the Mongol government, especially as administrators and as gendarmes. And they left behind some very fine Christian examples of Christian art, like this tombstone with an angel figure behind sitting in front of a cross, and he's also seated on a lotus, which is the standard emblem, the cross on the lotus of the Church of the East. And as you can see from what I'm going to show you, is the fact that Christian art also influenced Buddhist art, or the other way around. The famous twin pagodas of the twin pagoda of Zaitun has panels which resemble very closely, they are Buddhist panels, in design and execution with the Christian tombstones found in this area. And because the Christians were of a very high social class, they were foreigners like the Mongols, they were able to have very elaborate tombstones, as you can see here, with the lotus cross, the bearded cross, the jeweled cross on the lotus with flanking angels, and inscriptions in Syro-Turkic, i.e. Turkish, written in the Syriac script, with a lot of Syriac words. And the new ones are discovered all the time. We witnessed the discovery of this one in 2004, and it's in the very clear writing. There were also Christians who were not foreigners, and they obviously worshipped using Chinese, because the abbot of the local Chinese community was called Ma Antonius, but he left his epitaph in Chinese. These material are now collected together in the Quanzhou Maritime Museum, and they have been published by myself as part of our UNESCO project. But not long after we published our book, new discoveries were made of texts from Shabu in the early part of this century, or in the last century, sorry. These texts are from a much later period, but one of them is distinctively Manichaean, and since then a number of other texts, also Manichaean, have also been found in these towns and villages not far from Quanzhou in Fujian. And some of these carry, like the hymn scroll, refrains in Parthian, but written in Chinese characters, which means that if you know how to pronounce these rather awkward-looking phonetic characters, you'll be able to sing the refrain in Parthian. And they are very accurate, because Professor Yutaka Yoshida in Kyoto had no difficulty converting these characters back into Parthian. And these texts were copied probably in the 16th, 17th, or even in the 18th century, which shows you that Manichaean communities still survived in South China well into the early modern period. And they still regarded the chanting of hymns in Parthian as of special religious significance, a kind of hallmark of their religion, like Buddhists, of course, chanted hymns and prayers in Sanskrit, also written in Chinese characters. But one particular hymn found among the in the most important of these Shabu texts, the text called Moni Guangfu, Mani, the Buddha of Light, is a hymn to Saint George, which, as many of you would probably know, he suffered terrible torture before he was martyred. And this particular hymn gives you, as you can see, a very gruesome account of his martyrdom. What is particularly intriguing for a historian of religion like myself is that George was not a Manichaean saint. He was a very important saint of the Church of the East. And how did a hymn of honoring the martyr George could find itself into a Manichaean collection of a liturgical text? Begs all kinds of questions. Maybe the two religious sects, which were always at loggerheads in medieval Europe, in the Roman East, and on the Silk Road, actually had a high degree of rapprochement in South China, which helped both sects to survive. And I'd like to finish it with one of the paintings, which you could decipher, interpret as either a Christianized depiction of Mani or a Buddhicized depiction of Jesus. And finally, I would like to pay a tribute to Professor Lin Wushu of Zhongshan University. Over the last half-century, Professor Lin and his team of dedicated researchers at Zhongshan University in Guangzhou, i.e. Canton, have meticulously edited all Manichaean texts in the Chinese language for use by other scholars. Professor Lin is always the first at the scene of new discoveries, and his vast publications, mostly in Chinese, covers all aspects of the study of the history of Manichaeism in China. I can only hope that funding could one day be found to facilitate the translation of some of his more important contributions into English. In the meantime, I wish him and his team continuing success, especially with the editing of the many newly discovered Chinese Manichaean texts from Shabu and neighboring villages. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. That was excellent lecture, and your slides really brought it to light. It was fascinating. And while people in the audience may be thinking of some questions they'd like to ask, and please, if you have a question, you can indicate that by putting up your hand or perhaps other means, showing your picture. Meanwhile, I'll just summarize my own reactions. We've now heard on how one particular scroll, first noticed as important by a Chinese scholar and first made accessible to a European audience between 1911 and 1913, was mistaken for a Buddhist scroll at first, but the Chinese scholars observed that it was not written in Sanskrit or Pali and suspected that it was in Persian or Iranian languages. This launched our whole adventure that we've just talked about. We particularly have to thank such multilingual scholars as Dr. F.W.K. Müller of Berlin, who knew so many non-European languages and was able to decipher so much of it. And it played such an important part in the identification and study of the Sogdian language. And it's indeed fascinating that there were encounters with Syriac Christianity, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, that it appeared in India as well as among the Sassanids and was persecuted by Christians and Muslims alike. You've brought out so many details of its history. The story of Manichaeism shows that there was incredible fluidity across the region between different religions and societies along the Silk Roads, that elements were able to combine and recombine with each other, mixing and matching different religious ideas, symbols, and beliefs, as well as languages among each other. And the story in China is also particularly interesting, especially how it took different forms during different periods, adapting to different circumstances and political realities, and the fact that it still provides new sources of information about its history and survival is truly marvelous. So I would just like to see if anyone in the audience has some questions. If you'd share your screen or raise your hand. I can't see any of the other participants right now.
Hello.
Hello, yes?
Hello.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, one very quick question. First, I was fascinated by your lecture because I'm so totally ignorant of the subject that you're discussing. But it was a fascinating lecture. And the point that Sally has made, it shows that all civilizations, all cultures, all religions have a kind of flexibility in them. We are trying to make, they also have, I mean, they can also be made rigid, but essentially they have so much of resilience and flexibility. That was fascinating. But
Yeah.
the question, there is not a question. In one of your slides, I just came across the word Urdu, ORDU, adjacent to Kazakhstan. So I was wondering whether this Urdu is a place name or or a language or something.
Yeah,
Just
it means of course, as you know, it's originally a Turkic word. It's used not so much for tent, which is sometimes used. It means a palace in
I see.
Manichaeism, and
Yes.
gong, the word gong in Chinese. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I was wondering because we have
Yeah.
in India, we have this language Urdu. So I was
Exactly.
wondering whether
Yeah.
there is any kinship
Urdu.
between them, but obviously there is
Mhm.
not. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Professor Liu,
Yes.
can I ask you a question?
Hi, hello. How are you?
Actually, I met you in the last Aram conference in Oxford.
Oh,
and
yes, yes. Yes.
Saint George in the Manichaean text, and you mentioned Christianized Mani, and also there was a bishop who was common to Christians and Manichaeans. Can we think that the Manichaeism, the so-called Manichaeism, is a misinterpretation of the East Syriac Christianity in China? Because we know that until the Synod of Nicaea, Christianity was a mix of different sects, and these sects were joined with Trinitarian theology in the Synod of Nicaea. So before that, Arianism was there, Manichaeism was there. So would it be a misinterpretation of East Syriac Christianity as Manichaeism?
Yes, you asked a very, very good and a very difficult question, because while sources on Manichaeism in the Song period are quite abundant, written sources on Christianity in Song China is almost non-existent, and so we have to work backwards from the Mongol period. The theological, are you so asking question of any kind of theological overlap between the two religions? I mean, Manichaeism, of course, did worship Jesus, which is very important because Mani saw himself as a kind of Christ-like figure, although he didn't use the Gospels much. He did, every time he compares himself with Christ, of course, he would use Christian scriptures. As a result, Manichaean texts are still a very good place to look for what we call apocryphal Christian texts, especially gospel harmonies and things like that. What struck me as odd about St. George is that there is nothing in the hymn which is Manichaean. In fact, it's a very close translation of the Syriac version of the hymn, and Sogdian, because we have got them both. So the text has a 100% Christian provenance. It's like in the Anglican Church adopting a Wesleyan hymn. which is not a problem. But except for the Manichaeans, it's a much bigger problem because George is not a Manichaean saint, because there are Manichaean saints who were martyred, who were those who were martyred with Mani. Did I answer that question? Did I answer your question?
Yes, partially. How can we explain a common bishop for Christians and Manichaeans?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear it.
I think in one of the slides you mentioned a bishop who was common to Christians and Manichaeans.
That's right. Yeah,
How
it's in
can
his
we?
title. Yeah, he found himself, probably, as I said, thanks to Marco Polo, negotiating this deal with the Manichaeans being accepted under the Christian fold by Kublai Khan. This Mar Solomon, who's probably from Central Asia, when he turned up, discovered that not all his Christians in his care and his pastoral care were Christians, and some of them were clearly Manichaeans. So he carried that title. Which, as I said, in the Mongol period is an advantage, because the bigger your numerical base is, your religion or your sect is, it has to be a legitimate one, of course, a religio legitia, you get more tax rebate from the government.
Yeah, thank you. And what was the script of the Manichaeans? Was it Syriac?
Yeah.
Was it Syriac, or Pahlavi is a Middle Persian script? Have they used Pahlavi for their religious texts?
Manichaeans did use Middle Persian as one of the three main Iranian languages. Middle Persian, Parthian, which is a dominant language, and Sogdian, the second most important, because of most people spoke Sogdian on the Silk Road. But the Manichaeans seem to have, Mani was a great scribe and artist himself. He seemed to have adopted a script, which he might have used for the writing of his own scriptures in Aramaic, because there was an Aramaic script, which is ideal for somebody who actually spoke East Aramaic. But when the Manichaean scriptures were translated from East Aramaic into Parthian in Khorasan, in Parthia, not in Khorasan,
will do it from
they adopted that script because the Parthians at that time had a very complicated script. They used a kind of Aramaic.
I saw you
script.
there. You are there. You've been there for quite some time. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Manichaean script, which is the kind of what you see is what you get script, became very popular, and it became a kind of identifying mark for the religion. Just like when you see the Hebrew script, you think of Judaism. When you see the Arabic script, you tend to think of Islam, even though there are lots of Arab Christians who also wrote in Arabic. But most Manichaean texts written in the Manichaean script are Manichaean, even though there are probably some Manichaean texts in the very late period when New Persian was becoming important along the Silk Road, that some texts written in the Manichaean script are not Manichaean. But they are also used on magical bowls in Iraq, right up to the late Islamic period, right into the Ottoman period. And they are still very accurate. And they are used as a kind of for laying down curses or anti-curses. And obviously, local scribes still think that Manichaean script has got very special efficacy. But the texts are not Manichaean.
Yeah. Yes, I asked that question because in South India, there are several ancient crosses with Pahlavi script around it.
Yeah.
And where Arthur Coke Burnell in the 19th century commented, because he found Pahlavi, he thought these are Manichaean.
Right. Yeah, I don't agree with that. the Manichaeans didn't use the Pahlavi script at all. Christians did on a few occasions. There is a psalm book in the Pahlavi script, a Christian one, but we have no Manichaean texts in the Pahlavi script.
Yeah.
It's very easy to blame anything you don't know as to say they are Manichaean.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the answers. Thank you.
Any other questions in the audience?
Yeah, I have a question, and I'm Ranjita Datta here, this side. Professor Liu, I ask out of complete ignorance because I'm not at all familiar with the theme. But from whatever little I know, Manichaeism seems to have survived long after it, it declined in other places in China for a very
That's right.
long time.
Mhm.
What would be the reason for this?
Right. It's a very good question. Adaptability, isolation. The South China is known for its religious pluralism. There are many, many religious sects, and of course, foreign religions, because there's a large Arab-speaking Muslim community, and there were probably almost certainly Jews in the time of the Maritime Silk Road. So it is very easy for Manichaeans to hide in this cosmopolitan religious setup. And also, they tended to be a very village affair. So you will have a whole village which are Manichaean. And in fact, we have even complaints during the Boxer Rebellion that you have Manichaean villages who sided with the Boxers. And the fact that local people still knew they were Manichaeans is interesting, because they were not Catholic priests, so they were not trained theologically to identify them as Manichaeans. There is now a lot of research published in a Chinese journal called Religions, which is in English, by Chinese scholars, some of whom have worked with Professor Lin, on local gazetteers and genealogies and family histories. And they were amazed how many families stayed loyal to Manichaeism throughout the Ming period, which also persecuted Manichaeism, well into the Qing period. The Qing was probably, being Manchus like the Mongols, were probably slightly more tolerant than the Ming was. In fact, the Ming emperor said that I had every reason to persecute Manichaeism because they misappropriate the title of my dynasty, the Ming dynasty, the dynasty of light.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah.
Got that final point in about the Ming. Any other questions? If there are no more questions, perhaps we should thank Professor Liu again very much.
Yes.
And Harbans, did you want to say anything else?
No, my colleague Pratyanath, he'll do the thanking on our behalf. So you can invite him. Or let me.
Okay.
Professor Mukhya, I would also, in the interim, would like to introduce
Yes,
Harshita Kalra.
yes.
She would also give a small note of thanks from SAGE.
Right.
So can
Yes,
we
of
request
course,
her
yes.
first?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
And thank you, Sally, for sharing.
Absolutely, yeah. Right. Hi, Harshita.
And sharing it so
Harshita,
well.
yes.
Hello everyone, good evening.
Yes.
I, Harshita Kalra, on behalf
Mhm.
of SAGE, would like to thank Professor Samuel for this enlightening lecture on the fascinating topic of Manichaeism in China.
Mhm.
Your insights into the century of discoveries have provided us with a deeper understanding of how this religion spread and evolved in the medieval times.
Mhm.
I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Sally for chairing this session and for her valuable contributions to the field of Chinese maritime history. I wish to express my gratitude to Professor Harbans Mukhya and Professor Rajita Datta and everyone associated with the Medieval History Journal, as well as the organizing team from SAGE for their effort in making this event possible. It is a pleasure to acknowledge more than 25 years of long-standing collaboration between SAGE and the Medieval History Journal. This lecture series continues to provide a platform for discussing significant historical topics and fostering academic discourse. Finally, I would like to thank all the participants who have joined us today. Your engagement and interest are what makes this event successful. Thank you so much. I would like to now request Professor Pratik.
Thank you, Harshita. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't think there's anything left for me to add other than thanking Professor Lieu once again for this excellent lecture today.
Well,
Thank you,
thank you for
Professor.
inviting me.
And I would also like to thank the chair, our colleague at the Medieval History Journal, Professor Sally Church, for coordinating the session. I also take the opportunity to thank our colleagues at SAGE, especially Smriti Sudhakaran, Archana Jha, and Harshita Kalra for helping us put this event together. Last but not the least, I thank all the members of the audience for listening in and for participating in today's event. Thank you very much, everyone. Good evening and goodbye.
Good evening and goodbye, as
Goodbye. Yes.
said.